Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to CPW for our Thursday evening series, Meet the Artist. My name is Sarah Danziger, and I'm the Education Program Manager here at CPW. And we're just so glad to be here with today's, our actual current artist in residence, Dean Majd and Misael Hernandez. So before I get started, a couple announcements. First of all, I hope that you will all consider joining us on Tuesday, October 7th for a screening of Hunger, film by Steve McQueen. Will actually be hosted by Dean, who requested to do a screening while in residence. So I'm really excited to do that and continue our series with the Kingston Film Foundation, exploring films showing films that explore resistance in various forms. So we're really excited to have that going on. Meet the Artist is made possible by a generous grant from the Arnold Newman and Augusta Newman Foundation, which we very much appreciate. It allows us to host these each week and do it for free. And if you like what you see here at CPW, we have classes, we have a digital media lab, we have a new book press. Jackson is in the house. He's the tall one with the mustache. If you're curious about that new offering, I encourage you to ask him about that, as well as 4 current exhibitions on the first floor. So I hope that you'll come back during our open hours, which are 11 to 5, Thursday through Sunday, to check out those 4 exhibitions that we have, one of which features participants in the last 2 years worth of quick groups, which we're currently running again. I think there's maybe no more slots left. So hopefully if you're interested in joining a quick group, you can come back in the spring for another one, as well as Raheem Fortune. And we have a show curated by Nicole Fleetwood, and another show of Texas African American collections. So I hope you'll come back and check that out. Without further ado, I'm going to read these bios. First, we'll start with Misael Hernandez. Is a photographer from Springfield, Oregon. His work utilizes documentary, sculpture, and archive approaches to decipher the culture, religion, and identity of his Mexican heritage and Northwestern American upbringing. These 2 cultures and the landscapes of the West have had tremendous impacts on his character and artistic practice. He now combines Adobe brick materials, sculpture, and historically sourced images to construct photographic works that refer to his sense of identity and its relation to a deep photographic time and cross-cultural shared experiences. Hernandez received his MFA and was a graduate instructor in photography at the University at Buffalo. He attained his BA from the University of Oregon and assisted Portland photographer and educator Jason Langer. His work has been exhibited in Oregon and New York, including the Center for Exploratory and Perceptual Arts, University at Buffalo Art Galleries, and Create Community Studios. Selected awards include the Film Photo Award, 2025 Student Project Award, and 2025 SUNY Thayer Fellowship, and the 2025 Generator Grant administered by the Buffalo Institute for Contemporary Art, funded by the Andy Warhol Foundation. Hernandez, in addition to CBW residency, also received the Anderson Ranch residency, which will take place in spring 2026. And secondly, we'll be joined by Dean Majd, who's a self-taught lens-based artist born and based in Queens, New York. Born to Palestinian immigrants, he studied international relations with a focus on the Middle East at CUNY City College of New York. Majd began forming his intimate and cinematic visual language after being given his first camera at 7 years old by his mother. His diaristic work engages with violence as an imposed center point of one's life, focusing on repressed negative emotions within contemporary masculinity in relation to addiction and self-destruction. His work also explores the complexities of the Arab-American dichotomy and the Palestinian diaspora against apartheid and how they overlap. Majd has been profiled by Aperture, Map Magazine, Another Magazine, and GQ Middle East. His editorial work has appeared in the New York Times, Vogue, The New Yorker, Dazed, and New York Magazine, among others. He has recently been exhibited at the Museum of the City of New York in exhibition New York Now, Home, and lectured at ICP in New York City. He is one of the recipients of the 2025 Enfoco Fellowship Award, and I believe right now is in an exhibition there, right? That runs through when? Okay, through October 14th. So if you're coming from the city, check out that Enfoco show. He is passionate about cinema, as you'll note, for him screening coming up on October 7th. and is immensely devoted to his friends and a proud New Yorker. He believes that love, above all else, is the driving force behind everything he does. So we'll start with Misael, and if everyone can give him a warm welcome.
All right. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for coming out today, and I'd like to thank the CPW team and sponsors for the continued support in the Artist in Residency program. My name is Misael Hernandez. I also go by Mies. I'm a photographer from Springfield, Oregon, and today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the inspiration, conceptual process of my latest work that's kind of grouped together called Frontera de Carácter, or Character Frontier. So a bit about myself. I grew up and spent most of my life in Oregon. And if you don't know where that is, it's a state right above California on the Pacific coast. Until my late 20s, or until my parents' late 20s, they lived in a small pueblo called Usmac in the state of Jalisco in Mexico. And here's a photograph of my dad and the majority of his family. This was taken shortly after his sister had passed. I was probably like a toddler around this time, but this includes all of his brothers and his mom and dad. And then my mom, she is one of 12. I couldn't find a photograph of all 12. In fact, finding photographs of, family members is really difficult for me in general. But so they grew up in this pueblo, and it's a really small place. You can walk across the whole thing in 30 minutes. In fact, they're only like a 7-minute walk. So when I visit, I can see a lot of the challenges that they would have faced. I still see a lot of the poverty that other people just didn't get to escape or had the same opportunities as my parents. My father came to the United States when he was about 16, and he came here to work agriculture with his oldest brother and his dad, or my grandfather. But after some time, he made up enough money to become a citizen and establish that, and came back and married my mom and took her back. And so it was a one-way trip after the marriage. They essentially were there, came to the United States to become citizens and begin that process. And there's a photograph of, this is one of the main streets that I walk in between when I go. I try to go by yearly. It's been a while. I'm planning to go in January this coming year. So the way that I express myself, I'd say, is definitely someone more so from the Pacific Northwest, especially due to the relationship that I've just created with living in Oregon. I think if I wasn't an artist, I'd be like a fisherman, a backpacker, some sort of mountain guru. But I just spent the bulk of my time doing these kinds of things, which includes photography. Here's another photo. This is from a recent trip with my brother. And during my early adolescent years, I grew up in small town America. This is the Mint Festival in Jefferson, Oregon. And so because that was, such a important part of my emerging youth, I would say that it definitely had a big cultural shift in how I perceive myself, or even just the challenges of trying to identify myself throughout this Mexican-American landscape that I was going through. My introduction to photography came rather late in life. Up until college, I had never taken any sort of art classes. I wasn't interested in painting or drawing, or for lack of a better words, I was just like not that great at it. So I tended to stay away from it. But after a really challenging early couple of years in college of just switching around majors and trying different trades, I ended up in a photography class with Ron Jude at the University of Oregon, where he introduced me to photo books and fine art photography. And that was something that was really comfortable, and I felt like I was somewhat gifted at it, so I really clung to that. And shortly after that, I would come across Brian Scoopmott's and Ashlyn Davis's Islands of the Blessed. And this was, for me, a very monumental work to come across, mostly because it talked about work in the West, but I was really intrigued on how a body of work could be made out of source images. just because, I don't know, I'm interested in utilizing things that would otherwise be forgotten or not as important. So this definitely still continues to, catch my eyes when I see it. And I've never really looked back after that. So after working on a few personal projects and assisting Jason Linger in Portland for a few years, I was fortunate to have been admitted to the University of Buffalo's graduate program. And I'm someone that when I work, I tend to go out and document and shoot, just get a lot of material, and then I'll take a step back and then I'll reassess, like what kind of projects are shaping up, what directions can I go in. And so when I got to UB, that was very challenging because I then only had 2 years in a graduate program. I was in a completely different environment from what I was used to. And so I spent a lot of time in the Library of Congress. And with Islands of the Blessed still on my mind, I spent a good deal here. And I was looking at all these historical photographs of the West. But, I didn't want to completely focus in on something that had already been done or had already been spoken about. So I started to focus more on photographs of Southwest America and Mexico. Just because I felt that there was more content that I could uncover for myself. And there were just fantastic collections of photographs. So this is an Adobe sod house in New Mexico. And then I came across plenty of these Adobe buildings to the point where I got really interested in it. And I remember when I would go and walk the pueblo where my parents are from in Usmahac, I would see Adobe poking out of certain houses, or some houses would still have Adobe. So kind of as a leap of faith, I just decided to start making it. I started sourcing all the material locally, mostly, I just wanted to save money. So I started getting clay from the lake at UB, sand from Beaver Island, and then I would collect straw from after they would mow the grasses off of the sides of the roads. And I started making these Adobe bricks. They're pretty traditional brick sizes. Typical Adobe bricks are much larger, maybe 6 to 8 times the size. The standard size is about 11 by 14. And then they're 4 inches thick. So these ones were a lot smaller. They're easier for me to make. And it was a learning process. So I was learning to do this too. But I started envisioning the sculpture in my head, something that the audience could see through, maybe on both sides. It would be like this wall. And something that wasn't as easily expressible through a photograph or a traditional photograph. This photograph here is from the Battle of Juarez, which is near the border of El Paso. And there is another photo that accompanies it that I'll show you later. But I was really interested how, Mexican soldiers were fighting on both sides of these wars. Often sides the United States was partaking. And so that for me was an interesting dialogue to have myself, because I feel like I was having the similar experience with my identity. And there's also this portrayal of the Mexican descent, right? They were hypersexualized, criminalized, diseased, and dead. But overall, I feel like a lot of these photographs showed them as a declining people. And taken out of the lived experiences, these photographs painted a very vivid yet false image of what the Mexican population was. And so photographs like this inspired me to utilize them in a way that was different or challenged the way that they were viewed. And so I began to use these photographs to construct a new format that I could interact with other source photographs. And so I was also introduced to a book called Hyperobjects during my graduate program. And Tim Morton describes hyperobjects as objects or events which dimensions and space and time are exponentially massive, or they slip beyond our comprehension. So he commonly refers to global warming across the book. And so I consider photography a hyperobject. So photography exists far beyond our comprehensive prowess as a medium, because it has a presence as long as light is cast onto some sort of item, whether it is rocks, whether it's film, whatever you want to call it. But more so, I'm really interested in how photographs can exist from the past to be brought into the future, and then the future exists to be photographed to then become the past. So Morton expands on this by talking about temporal undulation, in which a hyperobject can exist outside of time. And I think that this quote is a good example of that. So I'll just read it off of here. Time bends them and flattens them the same way that an electromagnetic wave front shortens at its leading edge. Because we can't see to the end of them, hyperobjects, photography, are necessarily uncanny. Like the empty streets and an open doorway in the paintings of Giorgio de Chirico, hyperobjects seem to beckon us further into themselves, making us realize that we're already lost inside of them. The recognition of being caught in hyperobjects, photography, is precisely a feeling of strange familiarity and familiar strangeness. And so I began to see this in my photographs, at least in these projects, as I started to make them and marry them into the compositions, and to express what I was feeling in a traditional singular image was impossible. And so this is the first of my Adobe compositions. And to clarify, when I say compositions, I'm talking about like this construct that I make in my studio. So I'll show a few more, and anytime I say composition, that's what I'm referring to. But yeah, so the composition was photographed in my studio space with a medium format film camera, right? I'm someone who considers light to be an important part of the process, and so I consider film to elevate that to some degree. And this composition features a double-sided wall, so it's a diptych, and each wall has two different fronts of the war. And so I was interested in how they could clash, you know, people fighting from different sides, but maybe from the same home, and trying to define cultural lines, cultural identity. So for me, it's like an everlasting battle that I've kind of found comforting as I try to maneuver my experience as a Mexican American, mostly because, you know, life is always changing. But yeah, so this is the first piece that came out of that. Actually, I'm going to skip ahead real quick, come back. So the composition series arose from both Adobe and this inability to express my experience across traditional documentary photographs. And I started looking at Sugimoto's work, more precisely the diorama series, and where Sugimoto was going around different museums and documenting the spaces. And I thought that was very interesting. The way that he would take this frontal view of the diorama to change the way that the audience could perceive it. It was really, really fantastic vantage point, because it took something that, if you've seen it in person, right, dioramas in museums, it just, you know, you can just tell it's not real, obviously. But by utilizing this space, Sugimoto could express all these things across a single print. And there was this, I chose this one in particularly because it was familiar, right? If you're looking at it, you could say like, oh, it's an underwater photograph. And it's not until that you're looking at maybe some of the vertebrae down at the bottom that you realize, okay, it's not common. In fact, it's probably fake because photographs didn't exist at this time. So, you know, in a way, my constructed compositions acted as both physical and metaphorical, relating to an image like this. And so the compositions didn't have any order or definitive code. They're entirely intuitive and subconscious based on my lived experiences. And mountain composition was the second of the series. Funny because to my eyes, it resembles a mountain, but when I had visiting, you know, people in my studio, I would ask them what it looked like. And I didn't have the images on here, like the prints. They're not Photoshop, by the way. They're actually in the photograph. They would say like, oh, it's like an Aztec pyramid, right? And so I got that a lot, and which was understandable. Someone from Mexican descent making these Aztec pyramid-like figures. But so I started looking into that more. I started looking at archive photographs of the Aztec pyramids, and I found plenty of newer photographs, but I was really interested in these older ones, specifically because they were unkept. So the Aztec pyramids are not built from the ground up, like say the Egyptian pyramids. They're actually built on existing mounds and mountains. So the Aztec, the native people would go and they would place objects on their material to construct from layers. And so I felt this relation to that experience, right? Eventually, you could have archaeologists, whatever you want to call people that would come and clean up the space. So I was interested in how these cultural sites were being built up, then they were being covered by the landscape, and then you would have someone that would come back and clean up and show the cultural elements of it. And so I really related to that. And so I consider this one to be the most self-portrait-like of the series. And this is the stream composition. So my parents, with their choice to immigrate to the States, that came from economic hardship from Mexico and opportunities for my brother and I. And I think that move required faith. They were pretty much hoping that my dad could find a stable job getting here. So when I first created this composition, I was really interested in finding elements of nearby geography from where my parents are from. And the river photographs included here are from the Lerma River, and that is the river that pours into Lake Chapala, which happens to be the largest lake in Mexico, and it's only about an hour drive from where my parents are from. And so I was interested in this because the mountainous landscape of Mexico contributes to the very difficult development of how transportation and goods can be processed in the country. Think of like the Mississippi River, right? It's a long, but it doesn't go through too many mountains. So the transportation of goods and jobs were much easier to access for people versus that of what was in Mexico. And so I was really interested in this, and I started considering how I was utilizing the landscape more for pleasure, but people like my parents and their parents and their parents had they really fought the land, and so there was kind of this interesting conversation to be said there. And at this point, I was also starting to see some of the religious aspects of the work. Maybe this was subconscious, but I kind of started seeing this as like desert-like, and then it flows up to this stream. And so I started thinking of like Israelites and land flowing with milk and honey. My parents are very Catholic, like the nation of Mexico is. And, other than that, I also started seeing this relationship of, okay, like escaping something that is limited resources into a different space. So after I worked my way through the stream composition, I started working on this one, the crosses composition, and it's complicated on the surface. I have a deep respect for the foundation that Catholicism laid in my life. But when I look past the surface, I'm aware of the great deal of affliction and isolation that included, especially with my parents coming from such a strict Catholic background and trying to assimilate, but there was tendencies, and it was hard for them to give that up or to see it as any other way. And so the composition here strikes the viewer with 3 large crosses across the frame. They demand attention and confrontation. The central cross represents Jesus' death, accompanied by 2 other crosses, for the good thief and the bad thief. And so story-wise, the thieves had this opportunity to follow Christ or to walk away. Each thief made their decision, and I feel like this was, for me, a very similar feeling, this decision to follow, in my case, Christianity over Catholicism, which might not sound very drastic for someone that just doesn't, maybe compares them similarly, but for my parents and a lot of people in Mexico with a Catholic background, anything that was not Catholic was not good. So that was, this is the bulk of that. 3 other photographs of the American West sit within the composition: a glacier atop of the Oregon Middle Sister Mountains, symbolizing resurrection, perhaps my resurrection through the American landscape, and then an alpine stream bridges the gap between the glacier and a rosary, a photograph of the Virgin Mary half buried. I would say outside of my faith, my time spent in the mountains and streams has definitely been the most impactful in developing my identity, especially over the last decade. And so the Western landscape provides a sense of identity through physical and emotional challenges that I faced when unfolding myself as an outdoorsman. And then I really had a big pivotal shift. Not pivotal, but I felt that I needed something else to add to the work. So I definitely felt that something was missing throughout the process. I had this gut feeling that there was this more intimate feeling that I needed to include in my work. And I knew that these compositions would be monumental in the sense of like how they would look and how they would read. But I craved a series that I could call upon a familial collection of photographs, but also utilize Adobe at the same time. And so I was introduced to Joanna Zelinska's Photography After Extinction, which examines photography as more than just an actual record of life and memory trace. Zelinska considered light and energy and the sun to be a core necessity for photography, but also laid true to the Adobe material through a more practical and manual perspective. I should say that it was also true to Adobe, though through a more manual perspective. So this is one of the quotes. Indeed, if we think in terms of deep history, we can say that the past leaves an imprint of itself in the rocks, or even although this may perhaps yet still seem like an association too far, that the past photographs itself. Yet in what follows, I will argue that the link between fossilization and photography is more than just a metaphor, and that this conceptualization can tell us something new about both the photographic medium and about its conditions, which are also the conditions of our existence: light, energy, and the sun. And so, with this impression of light that creates the photograph, I see these tablets as something that fulfills that role by pushing boundaries of what a physical photograph could be. And Mama, tablet number 1, was the first of my tablet bunch. My mom's hands act naive as they clutch onto something small, most likely some sort of religious box during some sort of event. I could be wrong, however. The photograph has been trimmed beyond the original frame. I pretty much went up to the edge of where the image was, so the photograph was just a strip. But either way, I know it's her because she told me so, and I have no other photographs to really compare. I think that my limited knowledge to the photograph really forces me to clutch it tight. And off to the right, you can see a little bit of the more like technical process, which if you have more questions about that, I'd be glad to answer some of those questions later on, but it's a lot of trial and error, so I'll save it for questions. The archive consists of familial photographs, many of which I had acquired specifically for this project in particular. And I really value the way that they are modular, and you can consider how photographs from Mexico can interact with photographs from the Northwest. This one here, Caballero, tablet number 12, is one of my uncle riding a calf as a toddler. It's hard to see, but there's a hand that's like keeping him on there. And then on the right, a wahi brown from a fishing expedition out in Eastern Oregon I did with some friends. But I was really interested in this pairing because of the shared chaos of the images. It feels like the Adobe is containing these elements that are really interested when they're brought together. And then depending on how I perceive the images, maybe it was how well I knew them, or I don't know, how much I believe them, also changed how I would frame them. Some of them had the full 4:6 image. Others had just a sliver of what the image was. But regardless, the uncovering of the past and meticulous shaping of tablets, I think really alluded to the selection that as photographers we have to consider when working in our photographic practice. The one on the left is from a jetty out in Oregon. So I spent a lot of time here, especially over the last 5 years. I've been coming out here to fish and spend time with my dad and friends. And then the one on the right is a photograph of my grandfather, some of his friends, a lot of people who I didn't know. And so this tablet is one of my grandfather when he was a young kid. I think he was maybe 16 years old. Unfortunately, my grandfather was a really not a great role model, and he caused a lot of pain and affliction towards my mom and her family. But I never knew him in this way. I always kind of knew him as this feeble old man who I really loved. He's still alive. So I don't know. It's very interesting. I never knew the side of my grandfather, but I consider this piece fitting of what photography can or can't do as a medium. For me, I see it one way. For my mom, it might be another way. And it's really interesting to see him at this young age, because prior to this photograph, I would have never seen another image of him when he was this young. And then I just have a few more photographs in Oregon. Give you an idea of small town America I grew up in. So the compositions in the tablets clash in my thesis exhibition, Frontera de Carácter, or Character Frontier. And the raw and primal sculptural tablets became central in their ability to visually describe history and experience. And I really think that the compositions supported them in doing so. Despite the difference in formats, I think that they're unified across this web of telling internal expression, and they share deep time, they share space in their materials and impressions of light. And so time, I would say, actually becomes skewed, especially as the presence of historical photographs and closer present current day photographs collide to create a physical object. And I say time is skewed, but maybe it makes more sense for me to say that the presence of time acts differently in the work, more so that it acts as modular, and physical pockets of time and space are inside the material rather than the materials and objects coming out of time and history. And so by viewing my work in this manner, I can really disregard the traditional chronological order of photography that I think maybe limits the way that we see things in terms of an exhibition, and best express my thoughts and experiences in the form of an exhibition. There were 31 tablets in the show, and they were all, let's see, it's kind of hard to see, but they were stripped along one wall, and then the compositions supported. And so that was, I would say, the bulk of my practice in the last 2 years. On the side, I've been going to Usmahak, my parents' Pueblo, bi-yearly, and I want to continue doing that. I definitely haven't had the time to really go through and sort the images to figure out what the practice or the project will be exactly. And so I'm interested to continue doing that. But now that I have these tablets with photographs from earlier times of my family, I want to start figuring out how those can be included or accompany these photographs to create a body of work, whether that exists as an exhibition or a book. So I'm really interested in the artifacts, the people. I can definitely see myself in these photographs when I go. Even if I don't know someone, I can tell just by the way that they speak, their mannerisms. I can see that that was passed on to my parents, and I can see that that was eventually passed on to me. But I still think that there is development to work on for the tablets and the compositions. Now that I am out of grad school and just have more time to work with, I am working on creating larger Adobe bricks and figuring out a way to utilize them. So I'm just going to show you this video, maybe talk over the background. Skip ahead. So when I was working at a much larger scale, it was just a lot easier to make these bricks. I'm not going to lie. Now that I'm trying to figure out this large scale stuff, it's been really challenging. I'm trying to get the right mixture, right? Adobe takes a certain percentage of clay, a certain percentage of sand, and a certain amount of straw. So trying to do it on my own has been killer, but I've started cracking the code. And actually my dad has been helping out a lot with that, which has been just a really nice way of working together. it's nice to have his support because I don't know, Hispanic parents don't necessarily understand the whole art thing. And I think that him just lending a hand, I think he knows that the work is going to turn out. So it makes it just that much more special for me. But yeah, so this has been what I've been working on for like the last 2 months, and it sounds silly to just say I've been making bricks for 2 months, but it's been a challenge, and I've got probably around 100 right now. And the goal is to start utilizing them to make compositions, either in spaces, like indoor spaces, but more so in outdoor spaces, right? So I'm really drawn to the landscapes of the West. So my goal here is to start loading them up into a truck and start driving around and creating these constructs to, really help push what I'm trying to say in terms of an artist. I can make 10 at a time right now. Any more than that, I'm tired. It's hot. They require like 100-degree heat in Arizona and New Mexico, and I live somewhere where it's starting to rain. And when I was in Buffalo, it was even worse. Yeah, like worse. It was raining every other week. A little bit of the process. Material gathering. I mean, I didn't get all the dirt. That's too much dirt for me to haul. But I did go and get the sand. I did go and get the straw from a place I like to go hike around. And I have a composition made in the yard. Oh, sorry. Speaking right into the mic. But now that the weather's kind of shifting, I have to cover them up. So I'm stacking them up, covering them up. And then when I get back, I'll pick some sunny days to go out and start working on these. This is a composition that is just kind of a test. But, maybe something like this is something I'd like to start doing. And this is the only example I made prior to getting to the residency program. The thing I really wanted was for this to be like life size. So it's my height. I know I'm not that tall, but this is, it really has a different presence when you're there. And I think that the photograph will carry a different presence also. But otherwise, that's where I'm at right now with my work. I'm very excited for that. In terms of the tablets, I've got some tinkering to push scale a little bit and start including source material from the photograph sites. So I have to figure out how to do that ethically in terms of pulling, rocks and plants and stuff like that to start including into the tablets. But I don't know. That's for the next couple months to figure out. At least for while I'm in the residency program, I look forward to sitting down and just writing about that, what that might look like. But yeah, thank you.
Hi. Now I'm nervous. I wasn't nervous before, and then Mace went off, and I was like, damn. I want this keynote thing to go away. Sorry, guys. Okay, I think we're stuck with it. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. It's rainy day. Thank you everyone at CPW for having us and for being so supportive and so generous with your time and resources while me and Misael and I have been in as artists in residence. Everyone has been so amazing here. I'm a Palestinian American, self-taught, lens-based artist from Queens, New York. I'm from Astoria, and I still live in Astoria, and I make most of my work there. I love saying I'm a townie, but being a townie in New York is amazing. My mother gave me a camera when I was 7 years old, and I have not stopped taking photos. Literally to this day, I have not stopped. I grew up very, very, very poor. So when my mother would pay to develop a roll of film and saw that I only took photos of my friends, and that there weren't any photos of me, she would get really angry at me. It started at 7 when I went to school with a point and shoot and took photos of my friends, and she was pissed. I have since started to make self-portraits, but my practice is still pretty much the same. I make images of my family and my friends, my close loved ones who I consider family. So this is Caravaggio, and I like looking at his work because he's always been like someone I look up to as an artist, and his compositions, but his color and his light. A lot of people say he's like the first photographer, which is kind of a stupid thing to say. But you can tell like his use of light and his use of shadow, I think people really are drawn to that. But yeah, I find over the years I became obsessed with, or just it's sunk in my subconscious and it comes out through my work. When I was young, my parents were working all the time. So they left my brother and I to our own devices. And we quickly became a part of Queens, New York's skate and graffiti scene. And I began photographing my friends, staying up all night, sneaking into parties, sneaking into concerts, sneaking into bars, being in bars at 15 years old in Queens, and drinking and doing drugs. And I didn't speak much as a kid. So I used the camera to connect with people. It was my way of communication, and it was my way of forming bonds and intimacy. And that carried on throughout my whole life. So this photo is not from when I was 15, but this was the lifestyle I was living when I was super young. I quickly became fixated on documenting all aspects of my life and my friends' lives, especially at our most intimate and vulnerable, with the purpose of witnessing the truths that arise. So again, this is part of a body of work called Hard Feelings, which I'll get into in a sec. I left that world to go to school and help my family financially. And on the side, I self-studied art, Caravaggio included. I really only knew a few photographers, Nan Golden, who is my hero, and I discovered the ballad at 18, and it changed my life. I was like, this is the type of art I want to make. I take photos of my friends. Ryan McGinley, because he was like ubiquitous in the 2010s in New York, you couldn't escape him. Larry Clark, for better or for worse, and Wolfgang Tillmans. But I really obsessed over films and filmmakers. Andrea Arnold, John Cassavetes, Gus Van Sant, even Steve McQueen, who we're gonna watch a movie on October 7th, his film Hunger. I never thought I could become an artist. It wasn't common amongst Palestinian American communities or Arab or Muslim communities. My parents literally laughed at me when I said I wanted to go to art school. And so I just did it for myself. I took it seriously for myself. And I never had a mentor. I never assisted. I never interned. I didn't think I could make a career out of it. And then just slowly but surely, I made a career out of it. And I do a lot of editorial now. I think a lot of people know my work through editorial. Today, we're just looking at my personal work. Yeah, I think like it was kind of like I'm quite faithful. I think it was like God's plan, for lack of a better word. I just stuck to it and I kept going. So in 2016, I reconnected with a childhood friend of mine named James Deese Rubio at my local skate park. I took his portrait, and 1 week later, he died of a tragic subway accident. And this prompted Hard Feelings, this body of work we're looking at. Through his passing, I became close to his predominantly male friend group, who were part of Queens, New York skate and graffiti scene. Which, if you know anything about graffiti and skating, or graffiti specifically, it's hyper masculine, very toxic, very violent. It's drug and alcohol driven. It felt like overnight I was thrust back into the world I had left as a teenager. It's also like suspended youth, you know? My grief-stricken obsession caused my practice and my life to become one and the same. All boundaries between myself, my friends, and my camera dissolved. They gave me all access to their lives. It was also the first time I had people in my life who encouraged me to take photos. So I was shooting like maybe 100 rolls of film a year for myself, just for fun, maybe even less. I began shooting 300 rolls of film a year, just photographing every little bit. And I photographed just for us, no one else, innocently, just as a record of truth. I didn't think anyone would care about this work, which in retrospect is amazing, because I think these days young photographers feel this pressure to like be seen and like be noticed. I didn't have any of that because I didn't think anyone would care for anything. This was just for me and my friends. So I think because I cared about it so much and I didn't care about it being seen, it became good, or at least I got good at it over time. So initially it was this record of truth, but I realized I was photographing brotherhood, masculinity, male-female relationships. And over time I realized it showed me how trauma manifested within contemporary masculinity, specifically when negative emotions are repressed, particularly personal and collective grief, because we had trauma bonded over our friend who had passed away, which caused things like addiction, alcohol abuse, violence, self-destruction, loneliness, and including my own. I was this is my story, it's not voyeurism. I know like inherently photography is voyeurism, but I feel like this was my story to tell because it was me and my friends. There are some self-portraits that appear in this too. I just want to flip through. There's this photo called Hellgate. This is the Hellgate Bridge in Astoria, and there's an Astoria tradition where we walk through the Hellgate Bridge. It's like it's almost like a masculinity thing. It's like if you're a man, you do this, and you basically climb onto this thing, and then you walk quietly on tracks, because around this time, New York City got very strict about climbing bridges, and if you were to get caught, it'd be a terrorism charge. But there's this kind of spirituality that appears in my work, like this image, Dylan baptism. There's this, I'm very close to my faith, so I got obsessed with this idea that like our stories, although are of young men of color from New York who are often forgotten, should be elevated to the space of like biblical stories, mythologies. And I kind of got super into it and reference it through titles. Later you'll see images regarding like heaven and hell and all these things. My friends were part of a lost generation of men. And so I think a part of them knew that they were supposed to be forgotten by the world. So they bore their scars, they bore their tears to me as proof of their existences. They were fully participants in this as well. My work also tracks a period of New York before and after the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the rise of the fentanyl epidemic. Just real quick before we move on, I think there's this image on the left is kind of like a vaguely serious image of four men bathing. They're not nude, they're in their underwear, but it appears that they are nude. And then the one on the right is four men laughing, fighting, which is like also a very masculine thing. It's like when you get together and just unleash. And I think there's something kind of like, if you think about the ideas of mythology and these heroic stories, these heroes' journeys, these odysseys, I'm trying to view these like kind of moments in time, these very candid moments in time as like elevated, almost paintings, like very Caravaggio-like. For years, I made this work in a vacuum, and slowly people started recognizing, and it's been fascinating, like a fascinating journey, just seeing such personal work that I made just for me and my friends become very public. There's nothing related to identity in my work, in this body of work specifically, but my Palestinian heritage is the reason why I can make this work. At a young age, I experienced grief. This work is about grief. And I learned at a young age that grief and empathy go hand in hand. My work began as an innocent record of truth, but empathy transformed it into something deeper, a space for myself and for men of color to face their own shadows. I want my work to harbor and reflect healing and hope for those willing to engage with their hard feelings. So my goal with this body of work is to have people, viewers, experience it and relate to something that maybe is not often talked about and go on their own healing journey. This is my friend Suba, who tragically passed in 2020 of a accidental overdose. And so a lot of my work is dedicated to him. But I love showing this photo because I've never taken a sad photo of him. There's just so many photos I have of my friends, even myself, very sad. I only have happy photos of him because this is how he is and this is how I remember him. Yeah. These are a lot of like nights, long nights out, and I was obsessed with everything just being in the moment, being candid. It needed to be like truer than true. You know what I mean? There's a surreal aspect to the work, and I think that's my relationship with cinema comes about in that way. It's like the kind of intense colors, intense shadows, these candid moments make a truer moment truer, and you can learn something from it. I growing up now, and I'm like just a more mature photographer. I understand when something becomes an image, it's an object, and is the object even truth anymore? There's like all these things I'm constantly thinking about. But at this moment, it was like this rush of emotion, this like intense, everyday, nonstop intensity. And also there's like a thing about this life that's like very addictive in itself. So there's this photo on the left of me taking acid, which doesn't even look like me anymore. The photos, like all the self-portraits don't look like me. It's really crazy, which obviously we age and we grow up, but seeing it for myself is very strange. And on the photo is a photo of my friend CJ, who is my muse. I've been taking photos of him for over 10 years now, or it feels like 10 years. And this is him strung out after a night out. And there's like some like addictive nature to the lifestyle itself. Like there's the adrenaline of staying up all night and doing graffiti and almost getting caught by the police or getting into fights, and just being with your friends and this kind of like never ending cycle. And after a while it gets cyclical in a negative way, but in the moment it's very freeing, and it's very it feels like you're so full of like love. This is I was like, this looks staged, but this is a candid, just like completely in the moment. You can see the mask on the table, and that's like the giveaway that this is 2020. But there's not a lot of technology. There's not a lot of references to COVID. But I'm very proud that I made work for 10 years pre and post COVID, because you can really see the city changing. Like my heroes, I make work of people from New York, but unlike my heroes, I'm a man of color making work of mostly men of color, mostly people of color. And I'm from New York, born and raised. Everyone in the series, or almost everyone in the series, is from New York or children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. And most of the photographers I looked up to were white and not from New York, coming to New York and making photos of also people not from New York, photographing mostly white people. And with respect to my heroes who I love and I look up to, and I still, I'm very drawn to their work. There's something to be said about a person of color photographing a like true and real New York experience in this time. This is also like, I think before, you know, we've gotten like so social media obsessed. Before, I believe 2020 or around this time, there is still this kind of innocence of us making images in the moment, this like very intense, candid, unstaged imagery. I think it would be really hard because there's to do this now, and I hope there are people taking on this kind of legacy of work, like a Nan Golden or Larry Clark or myself or Ryan McGinley. It's very difficult because everyone's so self-aware of what they look like in images. And there's like a lack of self-awareness even in the kind of performance of a candid portrait in these images. I think people are just like truly let themselves go to the camera. And I think it's of the time, but also because of the trust and bonds we form together. Yeah. There's a bit of the performance of masculinity, and there's also, other than he's wearing like Calvin Klein underwear, but other than that, there's not a lot of logos. There's not a lot of technology. There's like a quote unquote timeless nature, not timeless in the way that this is like a perfect body of work, whatever. It's timeless in the way that if you took away the date and someone said this was from the 60s, you'd think so, like the slick back hair. And that was very intentional. I hated technology. I hated logos. I wanted to feel kind of so connected to the moment. And I wanted to engage with photography in that way outside of technology. So this is, on the top it says Magnolia because I made a complimentary series called Magnolia during this time, which was about how we interact with our environments and our spaces. And so this will be included, eventually I'll make a book, and this will be included in the book, these kind of landscapey spatial images. But it felt in the moment it was very important for me to photograph the space around us. So this is an image of my friend crying in my bedroom. This just speaks to the level of trust. I have so many photos I have a lot of photos of my friends crying. And there's a lot of moments where my friends cry in front of me and I don't make the image. This was genuinely because of the trust that we built over time. I also think that I think it's really important for people to see a very masculine presenting man in this way, being emotionally vulnerable. Because I think those things, especially for men of color, in which they're told that they can't express in this way, they need to see it. So, and I hope many people see this for their own healing journeys. So here's this image to the left, Heaven's Gate. And again, there's this, like, amongst the portraits in these photos from Magnolia, these kind of references to heaven and hell, and kind of how our bodies are connected to the spiritual world. And I think that's because I'm so close to my faith and our bodies being connected to nature. I think that's very important. And I also think when I think of the masters of art, like a Caravaggio, there is like such a spiritual aspect of their work, or directly religious aspect to their work. And again, just because it's young men in Queens, it doesn't mean that these stories aren't the same. You know, I want to bring these stories elevated to this biblical and mythological space. Yeah. I mean, again, my friends give me all access to everything, which is, it's such a gift. But this was a tough one to take. This is probably one of the hardest ones I've ever taken. There's so much of my work is about the self-destruction, and there's like a thesis within my work that's, how do you get to a certain age? How do you plan for a future when you get to a certain age and everyone around you gets passes away? I mean, there's so much grief after COVID, and also like during COVID and then after COVID, and our scene, for lack of a better word, was really deeply affected by fentanyl and death from drugs and alcohol. And I feel like if I keep continuing showing a space of survival, it allows people to feel that they can survive too and get through these things. Yeah. The photo to the left is a photo called Torn. It's of my friend after a long night of getting into fights. It's named after a 90s song, and Mirror in the Sky is based off of a Fleetwood Mac song, Landslide. So I'm really interested in using music, film, cinema, other pieces of art to elevate this series into like a greater art-minded space. Another photo of CJ on the left, and it's a photo of him crying, and the one on the right is me crying. And again, when I say that this is about me and my friends, I include myself in the work because it is my story, and anything I'd ask them to do, I have to be willing to do it myself. So they would see these. I actually didn't really show a lot of this work for years, and there's still a lot of work I still have to show and work through. Thank God for CPW's resources. I can actually work on stuff. But yeah, I would show this work in like slideshows privately in my home and other people's homes. So they were very aware, they're participants in the images. I ask for permission before anything is published, either online and in exhibitions or like group shows. And because I asked for permission, everyone is like, yeah, whatever, like do it, like take the photo, show the work, whatever. It feels like when I'm not asking permission is when there's like a bit of resistance. But because I've always asked permission, there's like a complete freedom even in presentation. And so I have to be as kind of like unguarded and vulnerable with myself and how I present myself as well. So the photo on the left is my friend Alejandro after Suba's passing. And then the top right is our friend Leia, Alejandro's girlfriend at the time, lighting a candle for Alejandro while he was going through something very hard. And then on the bottom is my friend Stefania crying over her father's casket. So again, it's this like all access, but even the hardest moments, I've shown them this work and they've thanked me for taking them, because I think it's important to be seen in this way, to be seen both in your pain and your like the greatest parts of you, the happiest parts, and your pain. It's like seeing someone deeply and not just for the surface layer. Yeah, these are maybe the hardest times of my life. And I don't say it lightly either. Like it was very painful to work through this work and work through these feelings. It took years of therapy, honestly. But now looking back on the other side, I'm so glad I was kind of, for lack of a better word, relentless in my image making, because it is like truly something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Yeah, and this is the end of this. Through this body of work, I learned about myself and my relationship to violence and how violence can become a center point of someone's life. And I realized through my work that became such like a like theme that kept coming back and back, what happens to a life, how identity is formed and shaped when violence becomes the center point. This is a body of work called Separation. I made it in 2018, so it was like a very short body of work, when I went to Jordan, the West Bank in Palestine, and the occupied Palestinian territories known as Israel, to photograph my family and meet my family. And similar to Hard Feelings, it was a record of truth, just for me and my family. But I realized it was more than that. It was family life under apartheid. When violence is imposed on young men of color in New York, it manifested in my life in that way. When violence is imposed on Palestinians or my family in Palestine, it manifested in apartheid and this kind of separation of this family in 3 states. This is my grandmother pouring tea. And a lot of people love this image just because it's like, it reminds them of their grandmother. And that was very important to me. There's so many images of Palestinians being subjected to violence. Even in 2018, I knew that I didn't want to show Palestinian life in that way. I wanted to feel like everyday life, because it's humanizing. When you see all these images constantly of Palestinians being attacked, killed, it kind of numbs you to a real life. To see my family and to see Palestinians living a normal life, it gives a view of what Palestine really is and the kind of humanity that is the humanity that's lost in imagery of violence. And everyone says this reminds them of their grandmother, and that's kind of a universal thing. Yeah. My work in New York is like very masculine. It's mostly men. But I found my work in Palestine to be very feminine or motherly. And that speaks to Palestinian society or Arab society or Muslim society. The matriarch is very important. This is the wall of apartheid. I think with the genocide post October 7th, that violence extends to imagery we see of Palestinians and kind of like wipes away the preservation of our culture visually. And I, through my work at least, want to keep speaking about this work because I don't want our culture to be visually stripped away. I want people to be able to access images of Palestine and to see what it's really like. And this is also like a very, oh, you see the Caravaggio reference, the high-minded painterly. This is also a very Palestinian American body of work because I can travel through these spaces where my grandmother, who was expelled in 1948, can't even go back. So I can go from Jordan to Palestine to Israel, the occupied territories, and go back easily with an American passport. And there's a privilege to that. And that's why I never claim to be like, this is like a strictly Palestinian body of work, because I have the privilege of being American to go back and not be landlocked. This is the King Hussein Allenby Bridge from the Jordan-Palestinian border. It's so dehumanizing. I mean, the process to get into Palestine is so difficult and so dehumanizing. It makes you feel like cattle almost. Yeah. But again, with the American passport, it's so much easier. And there's a lot of references to travel, taxis, trucks, borders, airplanes, cars, because of that movement that I was able to access that, but my family and other Palestinians were not. This is Nablus. It's my favorite city. And yeah, it's beautiful. Again, I find that a lot of people don't even know what Palestine even looks like. Fruit plate. Yeah, it's so simple. This is like such a masculine image too to me, because my father never really said I love you, but he always fixed me a plate of fruit. And I think that's like a man of color thing. I think a lot of men relate to that. But yeah, I think again, this feels like very like Caravaggio still life. And thinking of that like high-minded art, that Palestinian stories of men of color, stories of people of color, we deserve to have that kind of elevated space. So this one's called Press the Line, and this I only made for a year. This is when staging first came into my work. I was doing a lot of editorial work. This is when I started doing editorial work. And this is my friend Dallas. He's my play cousin. We always say we're cousins, but we're not. And people believe us, which is hilarious. And I think like this is when I started building, I like to say building images with friends, like taking parts of their life, taking parts of my life, and then kind of seeing thinking of like, where can we shoot? Where can we do this? What it's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to say, and then kind of letting a candid nature be expressed through the work. Like again, the work I did before in Separation and Hard Feelings was like truer than true. Everything needed to be candid. If there were portraits, they're impromptu. This is like very very thought out. Well, not too thought out, but thought out enough staging that we allow our relationship to bring a candid nature to it. And this one explores how the gap and tension between the term Arab and American, that dichotomy created for a new space, a new existence that's entirely new. Because it's not like Arab plus American equals Arab American. Our Arab identity is rejected by the West, specifically my Palestinian identity is rejected by the West, by America. Our Arab identity is also, or American identity is rejected by where we're from. It's like I'm not Arab enough because I have tattoos and things like this. And so what is formed is a new identity based on our socioeconomic status, or where we grow up. Dallas is part of a gang called the Bloods, and I don't want to speak too much about that, but it's this idea of how violence is imposed on him within this identity formed his current lifestyle. And again, the Caravaggio reference, the boy with the flowers. Yeah, I'm just obsessed with that painter. And I think this is, I did this for about a year, and we always say we'll revisit it, but we're not sure. It's kind of like, it's weird having like muses, because you have this like long friendship, but then you like it's better that we're like you build the image, and it's weird. Anyway, this is to say, when you take images of really tough times of people, it can be really hard on friendships, or it can and build them. And there are many friendships that ebb and flow, and I think we're like really good friends, and then we'll make images as opposed to spending a million hours together making images. And that's like how a lot of my friendships are now. So this one's called Birthmark. It's a new body of work I'm playing with, and it's bringing Palestinian identity in this idea of press a line of like staging. And I honestly said I'd never make work directly about my ethnic identity, because it's like a box that artists of color are forced to exist in. But I feel like all my work is about identity, and one that is particular to a Palestinian American experience, even hard feelings. And any work that is directly about the Palestinian American experience, especially now, might be some of the most important work I make. And I explore a lot of this work through my editorial work. And I don't know where it's going to be, where it's going to go, but I'm just enjoying making it. So this one is like it's called Birthmark. The series is called Birthmark. This is the title image. He has a birthmark that leads to the eye. There's like a lot of vulnerability and a lot of strength. And the reds, so it's like a very, like again, Caravaggio reference, but it's kind of like, I wanted to show like a vulnerability and strength within our community at this time. And this is another building of an image. This is a friend of mine, and we had this idea and we built it around his home. Circle of Palestinian men. This is my father and a bunch of men from his village in the West Bank at a wedding that we didn't, they split it up men and women, which some Muslim weddings are like traditionally. And the men's side didn't celebrate at all. We just sat around and ate dinner. But I like this idea in respect to the lives lost in Gaza. It is funny, but it was for a serious reason. But I like this idea of like, you know, like men gathering, again, Caravaggio, the Reds. My friend Noor, this is very much like Mary Magdalene, and kind of like going into this religious, like the Jesus and those biblical stories are Palestinian stories, but she's wearing a hijab, although it looks like she could be Christian as well. Yes, there's a Palestinian flag behind her, but the colors of the Palestinian flag are very prominent. This is a photo of my mother shot through glass, so there's a candid image. So it's this candid and staging together. And then finally, this is some new work I'm working on. And I'm just like really interested in making whatever I want at this point. And my work is very compartmentalized. I think it's because I'm a Virgo and I have like little OCDs, but I don't want anything to be compartmentalized anymore. You know, I did like very strict series, and I kind of want things to I just want to make images I'm interested in and then maybe put them together later and kind of just have them all be in conversation all the time. Me being the kind of my work being a deeper extension of me, as opposed to just trying to translate it to people as a series. You know, like if you want to know me, just look at my work and all of them make sense to my life. Yeah, this is some work. This is a photo of my friend in Paris. You know, even my editorial work, which we haven't seen much, I do so much of it. I want that work to be in a greater conversation of my practice. And although my work is compartmentalized in series, there's a conversation within my images that exists outside of space and time. It is a part of an overall practice that engages with intimacy, manifestations of trauma, the shadow self, and the multitudes of identity. This dialogue reflects a humanism that is intercultural, intergenerational, and tethered by the oneness of our shared suffering. I want my work, Hard Feelings was initially that body of work that sparked this. And Hard Feelings was this space for young men to face their own shadows, to express the shadow self, to engage with their hard feelings, to heal. But I want my overall practice to be that. If you want to engage with your hard feelings, if you want to face your own shadow, and if you want to heal, that's what I'd like my work to be for people. And this is the final photo of CJ. I'm still taking photos of him, and I want to take photos of him for 30 years. And this is him. He won't be mad if I said this, but he's 1 year sober, over 1 year sober. And this is him in Brighton Beach in the ocean. And it feels like a very still and healing image, because that's kind of where I'm at in my life. I'm also sober. I'm in a very healed part of my life. And yeah, I want that healing to be accessible through my work to people as well. Thank you.
Questions, if you're open to it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for coming. I love it. Thank you for coming. Does anyone have a question? Also, you don't have to ask a question, but if you want to.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for presenting. There's so many really fascinating through lines between each of your works, like thinking a lot about like fossilization through time and capturing these moments in your respective lives, but also like through time. Yeah, I could say way more, but for the sake of time. I wanted to ask Dean, in your kind of personal diaristic documentation, you know, there are images that are really, really difficult, and you kind of talk about your process of looking back at a lot of those images and kind of having to sort through your own feelings and memories and trauma. And I wonder if there are, you know, there's, in selecting the images that you choose to show, I guess I'm wondering if there are images that you choose not to and how you make that distinction.
Yeah, there's so many photos that I probably will never show. And the distinction is that some are bad. And that, well, that's actually like the main distinction, but the second one is like permission. And this is very, I don't want to go back on what I'm about to say, but as the photographer, I own the image. I can do whatever I want with it. But is that ethical, especially for the type of work I make? I don't think it is. And so I speak to people about work and how they want to be seen when it goes out. Yeah, the people I photograph, I essentially have them access my archive and what I make. And, yeah, that selection process is like truly collaborative, because it's their lives. It's my life, but it's their lives too. And I would actually argue that all the photos are self-portraits, but it's still them. They're the mirror, you know. So I think that's the main one. And then also I just think that there's some like really more viscerally intense images that, for lack of a better word, don't add to the work. Like they are very intense, and some of them are fun, and some of them, there's a lot of like drunk nights, like, and a lot of nights on drugs. And I just think that it would be amoral to show work that like clearly was just for us. You know what I mean? Like people are seeing the work now, and that changed the nature of the work, but that access was given when it was private. So like, I'm not going to show the work that would compromise anyone's safety or their like, you know, I wouldn't want like the worst photos of me out there. So yeah, it's not like a black and white thing. It's just one big gray area conversation, but yeah.
I learned recently, or heard something interesting about how sight operates in our mind. And often when we're forming images in our head, we're actually activating parts of our brain that we use to store memory a lot. And it made me really wonder, because it feels like a through line of both of your collections is this concept of memory. So when you're looking at these pieces of these photos, was that part of the selection process for when you're putting these collections together? Did they activate some memory in your head? Or could there be a sense of even unconsciously, maybe some of the photos you guys chose spoke to a memory you might have even forgotten?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because I was coming across, right, this archive of familial photographs that I'd never seen. Actually, my mom went to Mexico, and I said, hey, can you just collect as much material as you can? I'm making a project that includes family, friends of friends, stuff like that. And what I got back was, 200 photos that I was like, I've never seen these. I've never seen my family look like this. I've never seen you look like this. There were remnants of like, okay, like I can see parts of people, I can see parts of places, but I definitely think that there was this play going on in my head where I because I had the photograph, there was the sense of truth, right? And I think that's maybe all it was at the time. Looking at the work, I told myself, yeah, like, okay, so the photograph exists, so therefore it had to be real. And I'm interested, for me, in how a photograph can become that fossil, right? So the work that I'm making, Zelenska said something really interesting. He said, one day, everything that we're going to be is going to be as thin as a piece of paper. And for me, when I think about work, I'm like, okay, like, is that going to be truth enough? Like, will the visualization of someone be the truth of what they are, who they were? Obviously, no, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just yapping now, but I'm really interested in that process and what I perceive as an image, right? I talked about the Mexican-American images and how they were seen as people that were scum and losing and just deriving in space, but it's not the truth. It was just the way that it was come up.
For me, yeah, I mean, it was really hard to look at the work for a long time because it brought up a lot of heavy emotions, specifically around grief. And I think the grief changed me, and then it changed how I perceive the work. And I've grown I've created a healthier relationship to it, that I can show it and present it in a way that the work before caused more pain, and now it helps me process my past. And again, I want that to be passed along. I will say I have a very sharp memory, and photography made it sharper, but also I realized like so much of my memory is me thinking I saw something, but I'm actually remembering a photo I took. So the photo replaces the memory itself. So things that I don't photograph now, I remember them less. And when I photograph something, I remember it more, but it's not the truth of what happened. It's a version in my mind that was created by me making an image. And that's like going forward and meditating on this idea of like truer than true, and the photograph is an object.
I'm curious about both of your works are like super vulnerable from what I saw, and I'm curious to know if well, I think a lot of artists are often, very vulnerable with their work, and I think it's really beautiful. And so I'm wondering if that was always like the intention to go there, or if that's something that it grew over time. And also like, do you show your work to your families, and what do they think?
I think I was just vulnerable with my friends, and then that taught me to be vulnerable with my work. And I kind of knew to just like, I'm very ambitious, and again, I didn't think I could have a career of this, but in order for it to exist in the world, I have to be vulnerable with it. It was just a practice I had to learn. It's like kind of compartmentalizing vulnerability with people you care about and the type of vulnerability you share with a public. And my parents see a lot of the editorial work. They've seen a lot of work in general. I think they're like, oh, because they're aware of the type of work I've made in New York, they kind of like the very traditional Muslim. Yeah, but it took them even a while to even accept I was a photographer. They were like, oh, what is this? In the last few years, because of my editorial work, actually, they started to tell me they were proud of me, which is the first time they've said that in my whole entire life. So I think they've come around to it in a great way because I think they see what I'm trying to achieve and it kind of happening. Not just, I think they see also within a lot of my editorial work is very, it concerns social issues. I think there's so much of my personal work concerns social issues, but it comes from me. And because they see the social issues, whether it's Palestine or work I've done around gun violence, or they're seeing like how proud, they're very proud of me because of what I can contribute to the world positively in terms of positive change.
I would say that when I first started making the compositions, that I didn't think of them as vulnerable, but then eventually I started to see the self-reflection in the work. But the nice thing is that they're so symbolic that I can kind of hide behind it, right? I show the work, I can share the images, but I think it takes a genuine like conversation with someone to really get into the nitty gritty of why I put this photograph here, why I built this specific construction that refers to my heritage or trouble with my heritage and stuff like that. So I consider that a really nice piece about the work because I feel like I can pour myself out, and I typically don't pour myself out, like I guess just character wise, like maybe with a few close friends and my wife, and not so much with my parents. So I think it's interesting that you ask about family and parents. Like I showed them the work, but we maybe just obviously we love one another, but we don't have the relationship to say like, oh, like, are you doing okay when you're going through this? Which it has its downsides, but there's other things that we excel in. I think that's a part of everyone's family. But yeah, my dad came into my studio one day and he saw the compositions and he's like, wow, mijo, like good job, so yeah.
I have a question to both of you, one after the other or whatever, to the nature of your work. So it looks like you're into photography and you produce photographs. How do those photographs exist?
Like in the world?
No, is your goal to do a print? Is your goal to do a digital version that goes through the press? Is your goal, what is your goal, or what is the stage of your photographs and how do they exist?
Well, initially it was pretty much just digital because they were like essentially this idea of a modern family photo for me and my friends, you know what I mean? And then eventually when people started taking notice of the work, I started thinking about it for shows and books. And I think because Nan Goldin's The Ballad of Sexual Dependency had such a deep effect on me, I think I always knew it was going to be a book one day. So hopefully one day it'll be a book. Right now, I'm very selective with what I show on the wall just because it's expensive. I wish I could show all of it on the wall or like all of it in print.
I think the answer of Nan Goldin and as the model and a book, that you said, that is very imaginable for the photographs that I see.
Thank you.
And for you, I have the question, how do your artifacts exist? You always noted that it's 40 by 32 inches, and I think that's the size of the print. Yeah. But the object itself is much larger.
Yeah, so that was the challenge with making these Adobe constructs, right? Like I didn't have the time at the moment to make
a literal ton of bricks, but now that I have time and material, that's what I'm hoping to do, is not only to make prints, but to start creating these installations.
Well, that was the next question. Do they all exist as photographs, or do they exist as an artifact? And if they are, or are they photographed and then rebuilt to do another artifact? Or, and the goal is the photograph that exists, or is it the artifact?
I think for the sake of the material, because it is Adobe in the Pacific Northwest, it can't. I mean, it will exist in a term that like it will change over time with the weathering, and that's something to experiment with. But for now, the goal is to create the composition and photograph it. Like I said, I would like to do indoor installations.
Okay.
I got to figure that out.
Because as soon as you expose them to the weather, they're gone.
Northwest weather, yes. And then the tablets exist as physical pieces. They're hung on the wall, and I want to start messing with stuff that leans against the wall, lays on the ground, stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you.
We're out of time. Maybe one last question.
Yeah, thanks so much for showing this work. It was really inspiring and really beautiful and challenging and all those great things. So thanks for that. Something that I think is similar with the two of you is that you're very iterative in your practice. You start one place with an inspiration and you sort of chase doing your interpretation of what that artist might have been doing, and then you pivot, like your shift into doing Adobe. It was like a really stunning visual shift, and your shift into doing portraiture that was more about healing was really beautiful too. I'm curious to know what you think is next, like what inspirations are really pushing you into other forms or styles, what you haven't gotten to do yet that you're excited about trying.
Yeah, I think the evolution aspect of my work is important. I definitely know when the work is finished because I just don't have the drive to make it anymore. And right now it's going strong. I have like directions where I can take it. I definitely wouldn't say that I'm building the same work moving forward, but it's like, okay, like how can I break up these tablets to make them look more fossilized? How can I start including this material from the sourced image in terms of the brick? Like I still have to figure out, why am I making these physical bricks? Well, I think for me, there's a part of labor involved. There's a part of material that I really enjoy, right? You asked, what do you see your work as? Well, I see my work as tactical. I'm going to get hate for saying this. I don't consider it a photograph unless it's printed. But then how can I push that further in terms of a tablet, in terms of a darkroom print, stuff like that. So I think continuing to figure out how I can push the current material that I'm working with is my goal. And then I'll probably pivot into something completely different in like a year or two. No, I'm kidding. That's a short term, but I definitely see myself pivoting, taking hard turns. Yeah.
I think I want to make movies. I've been saying this since I was a kid. Like photography was always like the gateway to movies, and then photography became the gateway to more photography. It's like a medium you can obsess with super easily. And I love it so much, and I'm super into it, and it's going to be hard to detach from it, but I'm going to try to find a way to do both. I like the idea of a slideshow too within my work because I make so many, and there's so many photos that people will not be able to see. So maybe that as a gateway to movies, but I'll make films eventually and like video install pieces. But yeah, I'm also just really trying to figure out how to present the work in a very interesting way because there's so much of it, and what goes on in the world, how's it framed or not framed. But yeah, eventually films, I think. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming.